And welcome everyone to another exciting adventure and journey on riding through the unknown. I'm your host, Michael, and today's guest is a guest I am so excited for you all to experience and hear his story. It is an amazing story, and I've heard it on other podcasts, so I am excited he is here with us. And so I'm going to hand it off to my incredible guest to share his story. So I give you the one, the only, ultimate experiencer extraordinaire, Dave Hunt.
Oh, hi, Michael. Thanks for the intro.
You're welcome.
Yeah, that's cool. I'll start off by telling people who don't know who I am. Obviously, most people don't know who I am. But my name's David Hunt, just Dave Hunt. I run a YouTube channel called David Hunt Talks, where I've in detail, given my testimony for what happened in my life. So I basically started out. I was born in London in the 70s, and for the first 15 years of my life, I was a very stereotypical abductee. I had greys coming into my room regularly, and they would walk out of the walls and they would surround my bed. And I don't remember much about the actual events during the abduction. I only remember them coming to take me. Sometimes they would have American soldiers with them. I knew that they were American because I was into like toy soldiers and stuff as a kid, and I recognized the different types of helmets. And these guys that used to come in with these greys, if they were the soldier level, they had the sort of drop ear helmets, like the Americans do. And then sometimes there would be guys that looked more like they were higher up, like commissioned officers and stuff, just wearing these jackets with epaulets, all that kind of stuff. But what I'm more known for was what happened to me in my 20s, where a sort of campaign of deception was launched against me by these entities. They didn't come in the same guise this time. They came as like the human, like Nordic looking ones. I was taken on board a craft after I'd been to hospital for an x-ray with my wife and 3-month-old daughter. And they convinced me to get involved in a contact program where I'd help them by introducing them to other people. And that's like kind of like what has become like known in the UK, because there's so many witnesses. Basically, there was about 12 people that I took out to the woods to meet them separately most of the time. And some of those, I think about half of the witnesses of that have given testimony, to talk about what happened. And there's one guy at the moment, Phil Graham. You can look him up online, and he's been doing podcasts, giving full testimony about what happened. Eventually I realized that it was deception. I wasn't happy about what was going on with the people that were having contact, what was happening in their lives. So I put a stop to it. That's a kind of like story in and of itself, and where they showed their true colors. And now what I'm doing is I'm trying to I'm not saying that all aliens are bad, or that that they're all demons. I'm not saying that. But I can only talk from my own experience and like what I know. Do you know what I mean? And I just trying to show people that we should be using discernment when dealing with non-human intelligence, because it's when something has the ability to be deceptive, like i.e. with shape shifting and all the rest of it, then we'd have to treat them, I suppose, like we would treat any stranger, and accept that we don't know. And one of the things that was kind of concerning me was that I was going online and I was listening to a lot of people who were giving their testimonies about their alien encounters or their alien abductions. And my concern was that a lot of people haven't questioned their experience. Like they've taken verbatim like what these entities have told them, or they've taken the experiences on face value, and then they've walked away from that thinking that they know something about alien contact or what the situation is with humanity and stuff. And I just want to tell people that when I called them out on the deception, that they showed their true colors, and things were not as they appear to be. I actually had an existential experience when I was a teenager, and I realized that now, years later, that the reason why this campaign was launched against me was to derail me from my, if you like, genuine spiritual path. And I think that there's a lot of that going on with the so-called ET phenomena. It's too regular. There's too many people that are going through it. And like, if it was like entities that were coming from like Zeta Reticuli or, like something like that, and they were just a technological advanced race, it just doesn't make sense, the sheer consistency of encounters, and I have no doubt that there are, possibly millions of people all around the world that are going through this on some level. And that, to me, sort of smells more like something that's like a control system that we're all involved with. When I was born, I had this distinct feeling that I was back here. I wasn't really very happy as a child, like just sort of, I didn't want to be here, and I knew that I was back here, and I assumed that these grey entities that were coming in my room at night time, I assumed that they were coming to everybody, because I just thought that they were part of the control system. And now as a, like, I'm 50 now, but like, I've come back round to that conclusion. I do think that we live in a control system, and I think that these entities are probably just the minions of something else that's going on, and that things aren't exactly as they appear to be. Like I say, I don't want to say they're demons, and I don't want to take it necessarily to a religious context, but I think there is a reality to like the deceptive nature of what's going on, and the fact that we are being hoodwinked as to who we are. I think that's the bigger story, if you know what I mean, is that we're not being told, or we're having the truth kept from us, by a control system. So yeah, please, Michael, ask away any questions that you might have about it.
Well, and I agree with a lot of what you're saying about, there are powers that be that are controlling narratives, and we won't probably ever know truly, the full truth. And I feel like the biggest kind of crime that's been committed against humanity right now is because we have so much misinformation. We've been lied to about a lot of things by, governments and religions and stuff. That when people come up to us and say, "This is who we are, we're here to do this," we don't know if we can trust them. And
Yeah.
I don't know if we'll ever get that back, because that's such a hard thing to realize. Growing up, everyone's been lying to you in one way or another, in one form or another. And to go, how will I know the truth now when I see it?
So these entities, for instance, I'll tell you what they told me during the initial like contact as an adult. And again, I think this is a story that a lot of people have been told. Now, of course, like, because of my earlier experiences, I had this feeling of like not feeling like everyone else. When I tried to mention it at school to people, to say, "Hey, the greys," I didn't call them the greys at the time, but I was like, the greys that come in your room, and people would just look at me like I was mad. And then I started to feel isolated, and I was like, "Oh, okay, so you can't talk about this to people. This is something I have to keep to myself, or whatever."
Right.
And it always made me feel slightly like unhuman. There was a part of me that didn't feel the same as everybody else or whatever. Now, they gaslighted me during this initial contact as an adult, and they said to me, "Well, you're the reason why you feel like you're not human is because you're not human." They said, "You're one of us." They said, like, so there was three people on this craft, right, talking to me. Sorry, only one of them was talking to me, but there was three stood opposite me, and he looked a little bit like me. I know it sounds a bit odd, right? He was like, but he looked a little bit like me, and he told me that I was him. He said, "Oh, he said, you and me have an overlap of egos." He said, like, you don't understand the way time operates. He said, but you're me in like a future life, I believe he said, for him. And he said that we could operate together, like during this time. And he said that like basically they wanted to bring like love and light to the world. This story you've heard, how beautiful and spiritual the Nordics are and stuff, and they just wanted to build a bridge between humanity and the cosmos, help people realize in a friendly, loving way that they were not alone. So of course I bought that hook, line, and sinker because I wanted to believe, that I'd had all these kind of like nefarious in the shadows experiences with these other entities, and I took it. I went, right, that's it. Yep, I'm chosen. I'm the reason why I don't feel like I'm human is because I'm not human. And I walked around and I'm like looking at people as I'm walking past and my own family and stuff. And I was starting to think, these guys are humans and I'm not a human. Do you know what I mean? I'm just in a human body or whatever. And of course, what it was a really clever way of like isolating me. That's what it really did. They tried to make me feel like I was special and I was chosen. And of course, the first step that they wanted was to isolate me from other people. And there was no better way to alienate you than to make you think that you were an alien and everyone else was just a mere human being, And like, so I took it. And then of course they kept coming to me then afterwards on that. And they would teach me, they taught me how to see them properly. Like, so that the initial experience happened, but then afterwards they would come to me telepathically. And they would they would come into my dreams. I know that's hard for some people to accept. I accept it if you don't, find it hard to believe or whatever, or the validity of it. But I can tell you that I do know the difference between dreams, and reality. And what they would do is I would wake up in a dream and start having a lucid dream. And then these guys would break into the dream and then they would start talking to me in the dream. And all I can tell you is from my perspective, it was real. And of course, like I had lots of other experiences with them as well. So I know that they were real, but like, they would come into my dreams and they were telling me that it was easier to communicate with me on the dream level. So if we wanted a like clear, concise, like conversation, that's where they were having it. And they said that they were going to train me. So they over about a 3-month period, we went through this training where they taught me how to see them, hear. They said that I was naturally gifted for telepathy, and I didn't really ever have to do anything about that. They could talk to me telepathically whenever they wanted. One night, I was driving along, and one of them appeared in the back of my car. And this was a really poignant point in the story that at the time, it didn't feel like a big deal, but this was part of the ruse, And he started talking to me telepathically from the back seat. And he said that he really wanted to drive the car. And of course, at the time, I was completely on board with these guys. I thought that they were my best friends. And he said that he would need to enter my body in order to drive the car because he couldn't physically do it himself. Now, we'll say as well that at this time, he didn't look like a solid being. He looked like they would come at different densities, as in the way that you would perceive them. Right. And he looked like a kind of like a ghost, like you could sort of kind of see through him, but I could see the features, the head, shoulders, and all that kind of stuff.
Kind of like a hologram.
Yeah, it was like, I don't know if you've ever seen the film The Frighteners. Have you?
Yes.
Yeah. So it kind of looked like that, like the ghosts on that, and but obviously in this um, Nordic form, And he said to me, "Yeah, I need to enter your body so that you can drive the car, but I can experience what it feels like to drive the car." So of course, I just let him because, like, I was in a situation in my life where I thought that I was spiritually enlightened. Okay, I thought I knew what was going on because I knew for a fact that the graves were real. I'd had this existential experience, which I'm happy to talk about in a minute, which made me believe that I knew that what the true nature of reality was. I actually think that experience was valid, but all I'm saying is that at that time in my life, I hadn't interpreted it like properly. I was too young to
Right.
really understand what was going on. So I thought that I was spiritually awakened. That's how I was. I was walking around. I'm like, I'm a good person because I'm a vegan and all this kind of stuff. And I'm this spiritually evolved, enlightened being. So I thought I was completely in control. What I didn't realize is that I may know a few things, that other people didn't about the spiritual nature of the world because of my experiences, but I wasn't streetwise. Okay, spiritually streetwise, let's say. Okay, so I let this being into my body. Now that it would come into play years later because they used that quite a lot. They would come into my body quite a lot, and I would experience it like I was in a plane cockpit, and it would be like there was two pilots. So it wasn't like I'd leave and go somewhere else. I could see what was going on. I knew what was going on, but they would come in and they would take over, like as if you were handing the controls to them.
Right.
And now it wouldn't be that, like I said, with the driving, it wasn't like that. But I'm talking about when they were interacting with people, and other people have come forward and explained what it felt like. Apparently, it was it could be terrifying and quite mystical as well. But they would come in and then they would start talking to other people through me, and I would be sitting there and I'd be watching it. And these guys had like all the information on these people. They would be blowing their minds with like what they knew about them, like the way that a psychic medium would, but like on steroids, as if everything was just bang on, and they would start telling them about their life. They started doing this thing. So part of the program was they would send me into a social circle, and then they would use like a hypnotist selection, I called it, where it's like say I went into a social situation and there was like 20 people there. They would, so as I'd get the telepathics, okay, we're coming in, and it's like, yep, they would come in to my body, and then I'd watch them sort of like scanning the room, and then they'd go round, and then sometimes I'd be involved as well. Like they would say to me, like, "I'll go and talk to this person." So I'd go and talk to them, and they'd want me to like talk about like kind of conspiracy theories and all that kind of stuff, and see how open they were. And sometimes I'd be talking to them, and they would just be feeding like telepathic messages to me saying, yeah, go for it, mention UFOs. They'd say, ask these guys if they've ever seen a UFO. So I would, and then I'd like, they were gauging the responses from what they were saying. Now, if they were open, and like I say, a lot of the time you'd go into like say I was one time I'm thinking of particular was a barbecue. I was in the garden, and they'd go around, ask questions, but it would be like the way that a hypnotist, if he knows he hasn't got you particularly under a spell, he just calls you off stage, and he might start with 20 people on a stage and whittle it down to like kind of 2 or 3. But those 2 or 3, he's absolutely got them, like they'll do anything he wants, and that's what they would do. They would whittle it down to people that were open. And then once we sort of had them, they would say, well, do you want to go and see a UFO? They'd say, tell him you can take him somewhere to see a UFO. So I'd do it, and they, more often than not, they'd be well up for that, and I'd take them out to places. And of course, these guys would appear in the sky. They'd appear in different forms. Like sometimes it would be like white lights that look like these orbs that everyone's seeing, the UAPs or whatever. Sometimes it would be discs. They turned up as a triangle one night, and very occasionally, I can only think of like kind of 2 times, but they would turn up as a classic flying saucer, like with the windows and everything, the whole thing. And so then what would happen is they would gauge the person's response to having a UFO sighting, and then they would say to me that, like, oh, tell them that they can meet us if they want. Now, what I found was that even out of the people that wanted to see the UFOs, I would take them to places so they could see the UFOs. But then once they'd actually seen one, and I said to them, do you want to meet the guys inside? Most people said no. At that point, it was like too real. Do you know what I mean? They would go, no, I don't. And they would walk away. All right. They would be like, no, thank you. No, thanks at all.
Yeah. It's like, I've seen the movies. No, thank you.
Yeah. And they were right to do so. That's the thing. I mean, maybe it was like on some level, it could have been their own intuition that was saying, oh, no. Because there were people that were saying that I was dangerous, like if on some level they understood like what it was I represented, because at the time, like I say, I was fully on board with them and I was working with them and everyone thought that I was an alien and that at the very least I was working with the aliens, and people had like different opinions about that. But what I found was when I could say there's a few people that went all the way, and there's people that decide they saw the UFOs, and then they turned around and said, I do want to meet them. I feel like I'm chosen for this as well, and I want to be an ambassador for the Earth, and I want to act as a bridge for these guys. Do you know what I mean? And they would go through. And so if that happened, it wouldn't be a question of going on board a craft or anything like that. They would say, tell them to meet us at this place. Well, and I'd come as well, obviously. And they would have places like very secluded places, like in woods and stuff. And there was one particular place that I went to quite regularly where I was told to go. And actually, it was kind of funny. It was called Eden, this place, So like, used to take them to Eden, and they would just appear. Sometimes they wouldn't appear at first. We'd be there for a while, and they wouldn't be there, and I'd be thinking, oh, that's right, and I wasn't hearing anything off them. And then all of a sudden, like, you turn around to leave, and then as you turn around to leave, they'd be there, and they would have short communications with the other people, like a short telepathic communications. And then what I would see after that was that those people's lives would start falling apart. They would start, like, first they would go into some sort of shock, for a few days, and then they would be all over me, like coming to me for advice, because as far as they were concerned, I knew what was going on, and I was there to help them, and I was trying to, but I would see like the opposite effect of what I was expecting. I thought that this was all going to be for everyone's good, and that's not what was happening. What was happening was they were falling out with, like, their parents, and getting into trouble with the police, and doing all these sort of mad things. Some of them getting into like drugs and all that kind of stuff, and it was just like, I found it like really concerning. So I started to question the narrative. Now, these guys, they had the UFOs. Do you know what I mean? They had the blue tight fitting suits, and they had all the rest of it that people report when they say that they've had encounters with aliens,
Right.
there was no way that you could have discerned that it wasn't. I had, I was aware of some of the literature. I mean, I was always interested in UFOs because of my experiences as a kid. So I had read books. I was aware of like Nordics and all that kind of stuff. And that was my framework for who these guys were. Although they did tell me who they were, I also went, okay, yeah, because lots of other people are having this experience as well, And so I just sort of took it at face value. But then when, like in real life, people's lives were falling apart, I started to question them. And then a couple of times there was incidences where I took them out to meet with them, and they would look completely different. And I questioned them on that, and they said, "Oh no," they said, "we change the way we look depending on the person." They said because we like to make them feel more comfortable or whatever. We'll change the way we look depending on how they expect to see us and all that kind of stuff. And I was thinking, well, hang on a minute, I don't do that. And if you can do that, like, what do you actually look like? Because now I don't know anything. I didn't know like what they look like at all, because if someone looks 3 different ways to you, you don't know if any of them or one of them or whatever is the actual true image,
Right.
So I started to become like very like wary, and then I went as far as saying that I wouldn't do it anymore, and I started to refuse to do what they were asking me to do. And my life started to go out of control. It was like they went quiet on me for quite a while. But I had a series of unfortunate events, which led to me living in a tent. And when I first met them, I was married and had, children, and I was living in a house and a job and all that kind of stuff,
Right.
And it had all gone by the time this was finished. And I was living in a tent. I had no money. I kept like getting like odd experiences happening to me, but they had stopped talking to me directly. So I knew they were around, but because I could sense them. But like they weren't talking to me anymore, if you like. So what happened was, and this is where I want to tell people about how dangerous getting involved with non-human intelligences can be. So eventually I'd had enough of being in the tent. Okay. And I decided that, right, I needed to go home and live with my mum and dad for a little bit, which wasn't any fun. I was about 31, 32 at this point. And I said, like, okay, I'm going to have to, because I'm hungry, I'm tired, I'm not well. So I went home, and I had about 3 or 4 weeks of kind of R&R, where I was eating well, and I was getting over. I thought, okay, it's brilliant. I put a stop to it with these guys, and it's over. It was like getting out of an abusive relationship. There was like a weight lifted off me, and I was sorry for the damage that had been done, but there was nothing I could do about that. But I needed to look after myself, and I needed to live on. Like I said, I had children and stuff, and I needed to get my life back in order. But then one night, they sort of played like a sort of I don't know, like the naughtiest cards, that they had up to that point. And all evening long, I was walking around my house and stuff, and my mum and dad's house, and I had this horrendous feeling on me, and it was like as if like a murderous entity was like on your back, and it was right there, like on my back, everywhere I went, as if it was right on my shoulder, and I could not shake it, and I knew it was spiritual, I knew it was like, something, it meant me harm, and my mum and dad couldn't sense it at all. And I was like, go out in the garden for a cigarette and stuff, and it was just palpable. It was there. I couldn't see it. I couldn't feel it, but it was absolutely there. I've sort of described it before as like, if you was in an elevator, and like a serial killer got in and stood behind you and had bad intentions and the door closes, like it was like that. It was absolutely horrendous. It was, like I say, it was horrible. So I made a schoolboy error, and I thought, I can't handle this anymore. I'm just going to go to bed and go to sleep. Now, I'll tell you, anyone who may go through this in the future, if you've got something on your back, do not go to sleep. Okay, it's like you drop your defenses. And once I'd gone to sleep, now this is where it comes back to what I was saying earlier. Okay, I found out later on that the reason why this entity was able to get hold of me was because of the permission I'd given years before of allowing them to enter my body. Now, the last memory I have is going to bed. I felt absolutely horrible. It did not leave me, this feeling and this presence. But at some point I passed out. I went to sleep. And that's the last thing I remember. My next recall is waking up in hospital. Like, I think it was like 2.5 days later. Now, what had happened, and I can tell you now, I was not suicidal. Okay. I was actually, like I say, I'd been through some hard times and with this stuff, but like I was on the up and up, I was sorting my life out. And but what officially happened was that I went to bed, and then at 1 o'clock in the morning, thereabouts, I got up, went downstairs, went into my mum's drug cabinet, took a whole bottle of diazepam, like a Valium, and then took a bottle of whiskey and downed a whole bottle of diazepam with a bottle of whiskey.
Oh my gosh.
Left the house, right? Walked a couple of streets away from the house, walked into a field, went over a fence, walked into a field where I assume the effects of the narcotics and that, I collapsed in the field, and it was January in the UK, which is cold enough to kill you at that time of year. And I was laying in a field, basically dying of the effects of the drugs and possible hypothermia going to come on. Had not an ambulance driver decided that he needed a wee, pulled over at the side of the road and thought, I'll just hop over this fence into this field and go for a quick wee. So he did that, and obviously hopped over, stood there, was about to go for a wee, looked down and saw my head. And they saved my life. So picked me up immediately, rushed me to hospital. While I was in hospital there, the Sun newspaper, I don't know if you heard of the Sun, have you, like in the UK? But it was running a story about 2 UFOs were seen over the hospital that I was in. I was in a coma. And apparently, like, police helicopters have been called out to it. And every time the police helicopters would turn up, they were white lights, 2 white lights, like sitting over the hospital. And they would disappear. And then when the helicopters would go, these white lights would reappear again. And apparently it made the national newspaper, as far as when they run these. This was years ago, but when they run these kind of UFO stories. When I woke up, I said something about being on a spaceship, and they put me in a wheelchair, and they wheeled me into the psyche unit, and I spent a month in the psychiatric unit in the hospital. At that point, I decided that I would tell these doctors everything they wanted to know, because at that point I was starting to think like, maybe I'm insane. You know what I mean? Maybe I am insane. Like obviously, you go through some of the experiences that I've been through, and you think, oh, I'm, if you like, I'm sane enough to sort of go, well, I bet insane people think they're sane too, I can maybe I should just tell these doctors everything I know, and just see where it lies, see where it falls, basically. So I did. I told them everything. I spent 2 weeks in the hospital, and I told them everything that had happened to me. I told them all about the entities. I told them about the program that I'd been involved in. I told them about the childhood experiences. And they said to me at the end of the 2 weeks, I was supposed to be in 28 days, but they only kept me in 2 weeks. And they said, Dave, they said, you're one of the most balanced psychological people I've ever met. They said, we're going to have to let you go, mate. They said, you've got no psychosis going on. And I was like, okay. I was like, but I said, are you saying that you believe me about what's been going on? And they said, well, we can't say that. This was a while ago, do you know what I mean? They said, we can't say that. They said, but you can go. Now, there was another guy that came in and interviewed me in the hospital. And I always got the impression that he wasn't a doctor, that he was someone else, and I can't for the life of me think of how he introduced himself, or whether he actually did give me a name or anything like that. But he talked to me for about 3 hours, and all of his questions were kind of not like asking me as if he didn't believe me or whether he was psycho-evaluating me. He just wanted to talk about them. He just wanted to talk about what they said specifically. He wanted to know all details. That's what he wanted to know. That's all he wanted to know, really, was like details. What did they say? How often did you meet? What was going on? So again, in the nature of full disclosure, I did. I told him everything that he wanted to know. And I don't know if that went in my favor somewhat, but the doctors were told to basically back off, and I was let go out of the hospital. So yeah, so I basically, after that, I got back on my, if you like, genuine spiritual journey towards truth. I no longer have any, if you like, non-human intelligence communications, because I won't have it. I've had them a couple of times come into my house, but you see, half the problem is that I can see them because they trained me how to see them.
Right.
And, I think I'm fairly naturally clairvoyant anyway.
I actually have an interesting question.
Yeah.
If I'm understanding right, you were married, had kids while this was going on. When you said no more, the wife and kids disappear, and you go through the hospital deal, and then you're with your parents. So I'm wondering if I'm following that correctly in the chain of events. Do you think your family was placed to help you stay with them and in their program?
It was to be honest with you, when the program started, it was like the start of the end for me and my wife. As soon as it started,
Okay.
all right. So we immediately had a difference. So I'll go back to the original event. So me and my wife and my 3-month-old daughter, when we were taken on the way back from the hospital, my wife experienced seeing the craft. Right, she was driving because I was sitting in the back seat with the baby, in a baby seat.
Right.
And, so she was the one that called my attention to the fact she called it a shield. It looked like an upside down shield. Was in front of the car. like above and in front of the car, but pacing us. And she said that like she was the one that called my attention to that, and I was like looking and saw it and stuff. But then I experienced the going on board the craft. She only experienced missing time. And I said to her that that was totally in line with what I experienced. I said, because when we were all on the craft, but she was off to my left, and then my daughter was off to her left, but it's still in the baby seat. And my wife's chin was like on her chest. She was absolutely out of it. And my baby was asleep as well. But to be fair, my baby was asleep when the initial contact happened. But but I assume she was probably being kept under, just like my wife was. And so I went through the initial communication with them on my own. So when we got back to the house, and she then confirmed that she'd lost 45 minutes on a what normally would be a 25-minute journey. And I was trying to tell her what had happened, and she was immediately going, "No, that's not what happened." She said, "We saw the craft, we saw the craft, and then it blinked out." And I was like, "Yeah." I was like, "We were taken on board the craft." And she was like, "No," and she wouldn't have it. And then we even had the ticket for when we left the car park from the hospital. So I was like trying to say to her, like, explain this. That's why she will accept that we lost 45 minutes, because I proved it to her on the day. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
But she, and I said to her, I said, I know you lost time. I said, because I said, and I know you don't have any recollection. I said, because you were absolutely comatose when you were on the board the craft. I said, that was, and of course, I think from the entity's point of view, it was actually important. They were trying to separate me from everything I had in my life. So I don't think my wife and family and that were in on it. I think the entities were trying to separate me from them. They were trying to take me away from what was actually stable in my life. Do you know what I mean? So I belonged more to them than I did my family. And at the time, all I can say is that I always felt like I had a special role being here, because of the other stuff that had happened. And I did choose them over her. I'm sad to say, that is kind of what happened. I chose my relationship with them over her and a stable life. So yeah, it won't happen again, mate. I'll tell you that.
Oh, I'm sure it won't, but thank you for clarifying that. And I'm curious, now that you're free of them, you know, does your ex allow you to see the kids, or is she
Well,
still, nope?
I never actually lost access to seeing my children. Do you know what I mean? I was always very close to them. And even when I was living in the tent, my wife would bring the children up to me and let them stay with me sometimes in the tent, So we made the best of it, And she just couldn't have me in the house. So she was well aware that something was going on. I didn't have to sort of try and prove to her that by that time in the story, she was well aware of what was going on. She'd experienced a lot of strange things. So she'd seen like entities, and she'd had like bedroom experiences, encounters, where she would wake up in the night and see them in the room. And then one night, I was laying upstairs and she was laying downstairs. And I had like what people often refer to as sleep paralysis,
Right.
I was laying there, and then all of a sudden I couldn't move, and I felt like kind of scared, like a fear had kind of gone over me. And then I had this sense of an entity, like sort of like stood at my headboard, like sort of like I couldn't see it because I couldn't look anywhere, but I that went on for a while. And I went downstairs after it finished. I was completely awake as well. That's the thing, is I wasn't asleep or mid-sleep or anything. I was just laying there, do you know what I mean? And it happened, and paralyzed, all the rest of it. So then I went downstairs, and my wife was going, "Man, the weirdest thing just happened to me." She said, I was like, "Yeah, go on." And she was like, "I was just laying on the couch." She said, and all of a sudden, she said, "I was paralyzed." She said, like, it was really weird. She said, like, and I could feel like a presence at my head. And I was like, "Yeah, that just happened to me upstairs." You know, so she was well privy to like a lot of these weird peripheral things that were happening. You know, she wasn't having the full blown contact, and I think that was on purpose. I think a lot of that was on purpose, so that because I think if she had, obviously, she would have like not been on board, but she would have related to me better. You know, she would have gone, "Oh, Dave, yeah, okay, you know, this is what's going on."
Right.
All they would ever do was just like, yeah, it was just be playing shadows in the, you know, smoke and mirrors with her, you know. So she'd have experiences, but never anything like absolute concrete. But yeah, she knew it was going on with me. She knew it was going on. And,
So Dan Guest is asking, do you think they were shadow beings that was causing the paralysis?
so, I mean, I find it difficult to like clarify anything, if you know what I'm saying. I've got a feeling that like all of these entities are kind of like different facets of the same phenomena. You know, I think like depending on what frequency band you're seeing them on, you'll see them differently. I've had it before where I'm stood next to someone, so we'd had a couple of contact experiences that hadn't gone that smoothly, and there'd be times where people wanted to see them, and I'd take them to the spot, and they would see like a shadow entity, yeah, like your friend was saying.
Right.
I could see them solidly. So like, and they would be talking to me telepathically and just saying, "He can't do it. He can't see us. He can't see us properly." And I'd be like saying to them, like, you know, like going through breathing exercises and stuff like that. And then there was a technique they would use where they would want you to not look at them directly, but to look like away. You know, like the way people say, "Oh, I saw something in the corner of my eye." You know,
Right.
they would use that technique. They explained to me that the spectrum of vision was actually broader at the peripheral of our vision. And then what they would do is they'd get them to sort of, if they couldn't see them, they would get them to stand like, you know, adjacent to them. And then very, very slowly, and I'm talking sometimes minutes and minutes of this, very, very slowly turn their head and allow them to come into the central vision. And then what would happen sometimes is that people would see them as shadow entities. And then if they did the exercise properly and allowed it to happen, the shadow entities would then turn into the formed entities. Or they would sometimes go from dark to light. Sometimes people would say to me, "Oh, it looked like a shadow entity." And then when I got to sort of like kind of 45 degrees, it looked like a white entity. And but then sometimes people would just never be able to get to see them directly. So I've got a feeling, I can't say for sure. Okay, I wouldn't say to you get, you know, to the comment that that I know anything I don't know. But my strong suspicion is that we see these entities in all different types of forms, but it could be the same source, you know. But it's just depends on who you are and what you're, how you perceive them, basically. Yeah, everyone's kind of perceiving them separate, differently, and I think that accounts for a majority of it. Obviously, I do believe there's a myriad of different beings, okay, out there. But the way we perceive them has a lot to do with our ability to be able to perceive frequency. It's not
Right.
necessarily that we're seeing them for what they actually look like. I think we're seeing them for what we're capable of seeing, you know. And like I say, I know that two people can be stood next to each other and they can be seeing different things. And that was the same for the UFOs as well, to be fair. I'd had that where I could see a disc but the person next to me could only see a white light, and I had no idea. Again, I think the same thing was in play, because at the time I wasn't sure what was going on with that. And I would ask them, and again, they would just say, it's just perception. It's just like different people know how to perceive differently, or at different levels of natural giftedness. One of the things they did explain to me, which I believe was probably true, was they said that what we call spiritual gifts and stuff like that is very similar to like playing a guitar. They said that people fell into three kind of main categories. They said you have people that are gifted. So you have people that are spiritually gifted, born with a gift, of clairaudience, clair vision, all that kind of stuff. And they said, of course, you always get some people that just can't do it no matter what. They're just the absolute other end of the spectrum. But they said, but most people are very similar to the way it is with a guitar, as in, like, most people fall into the category that if they practiced and committed, that they could get pretty good at it. Do you know what I mean? Might never be, Jimi Hendrix or whatever, but they could get really good as long as they practiced. So they said that spiritual gifts or spiritual ability was the same. Most people, if they could bother to practice, they would go from not being able to do it to being able to do it. And as long as they maintained a practice. And again, when I've had people say to me, "Oh, I can't see spirits or anything like that," and I'm like, "How often do you practice?" And of course, people just don't think to. I mean, I don't practice, but obviously because I don't want to see them. I'm not interested in seeing them anymore. But I can't stop other people from going on their own journeys. I do think that we're going into a period for humanity where we're kind of going through some sort of awakening and some sort of kind of great revealing. So I think obviously it's a part of the process that we're waking up to the fact that there is a non-human intelligence involved with this world, and probably rightly so, that we need to face it and we need to have a look at it, and that's going to involve some people going through this experience, I suppose.
And on that note, Dan Guest asked earlier about his other comment was in line where you were, so I held this question. He was asking, Dave, where about did your experiences happen in the UK? Also, thank you for sharing your testimony.
Okay, thanks, mate. Yeah, cheers. No, I've always lived in the UK. I was born in London, but where this contact program, if you like, happened, it happened in Oxfordshire, which is kind of in like middle England, rural England. But now I live in Wales, so I don't know if you know, obviously, like what the UK is like on a map, but I now live in Wales, so right out west of the UK. That's where I live now. So yeah, but yeah, most of the stuff we're talking about happened in Oxfordshire. So,
and Dana's wondering if we're drawn towards these others to help bring in a better timeline. And I'll kind of expand it with where we're going is, were you exposed maybe to the deceptive ones so that if the true extraterrestrials, if that's what we want to call them, arrived, you would know the difference and be able to say, hey, these are here to help us, these are not. So you guys can do what you want. This is my experience.
So I had an experience with what I believe to be genuine benevolent beings. I like I say, I can't say what I don't know. Like most of my experiences were, like, say, 99% of it was with the deceptive entities. But one night I had an experience. Unfortunately, like I said, I wasn't on my own. I was with a friend who will happily stand up in any court and say this happened, where 3 guys walked into our front room while we were meditating. The first thing we had was telepathic. We were both sitting on a couch each as like cross-legged meditating, like you do. And we both received a telepathic message at the same time. Said, "Look, we're coming in. Is it possible for you just to stay still?" But it had a completely different feel. It had a very, it was friendly, but it was very mature. It was like just a very down to earth kind of spiritual maturity about it. Wasn't all mystical and all this kind of stuff, like what a lot of the deceptive stuff is. Very mystical in nature, very sort of like, ooh, you know what I mean? It loves to do that to you. It thinks that that's what you want. But these guys were not like that. And they walked in to the front room where we were, and there was 3 of them. One sat next to my friend. The other one knelt down on the floor near where I was sitting on the couch. And the third one, who seemed to be controlling things. Now, these guys, they also looked like these Nordic entities. They looked like human beings, right? But they were also wearing these kind of fairly like tight-fitting suits and all that kind of stuff. Now, at that point, I passed out, but my friend, he didn't. He was sat there and he was conscious for the whole thing. And what he said happened, he said they laid me on the couch. They laid me down on the couch, the one that was by me. And he said he got out this light and he started passing it from my head to my feet. And he was doing it over and over again. And the guy that was sat next to my friend, his name's Ricky Meadows. He has gone, like I say, he has gone on record about this. He said that the guy that was sat next to him on the sofa explained to him that they were genuinely helping me. He said that Dave would be dead by now. He said if we didn't keep coming and doing this energetic work on him. He said that they were doing something to heal my body, right? And he said that they couldn't stay very long. He said because they basically, he said it was like as if like the control system would triangulate down on them very quickly, and they said they only had a matter of like minutes, before they had to leave. They didn't try to sell him any bullshit. He said they were really lovely, but not overly in a sort of like kind of a fake love and light sort of way, you know what I mean? Which I think a lot of that is deceptive.
A more authentic.
It was just, he said they were just so mature. He said they were just like a really, really mature guys, lovely guys, but not in a way that made you feel they were trying to sell it to you, you know what I mean? And so my next conscious experience was that I saw him as he was like putting me back up right on the sofa. And I looked over, and the guy that was next to my mate Rick, he waved at him like a child, he did this sort of silly wave like this, right? And my mate just like went, waved at him back, and then he got up, and they got up, and they just kind of smiled at us, but they were gone. It was as if they didn't have time to hang around. And I was like, said to him, like, I said, what the hell just happened then, And then he told me everything that had happened. And I was like, I think we just met some genuine ones. These guys were not from this matrix, if you like. I think they were coming from outside of what we call, the construct or whatever. And they were not part of it. I think a lot of the entities that people are dealing with are coming from within the control system. So we're talking about like what is commonly referred to like the astral realms and stuff like that. But they're all the astral realms, or whatever you want to call them. They're part of this control system. They're just levels of the frequency of the information field that we can't see with our physical eyes. That's what we call the astral realms, basically. And they're coming down from those frequencies, and they're coming into the control system because they work for the control system. And we're the product, That's not, I'm not saying it's all doom and gloom. It's far from it. The truth is beautiful. But the lie is what they're involved in, and they're involved in maintaining the lie. Do you know what I mean? So
Yes, and I think it's important, that we distinguish this, because how many people will sit there, and go, "Oh, you're looking like, say, the Nordic, for example," and you're like, "Oh, I've always been hearing, people talking about how beneficial they are," so they'll just blindly let them in because they think that's who it is, and it's important to hear that, yes, they may, look like, but they may not be. And so we have to use discernment and know who is coming and not coming, and that there are groups out there that don't, have your best interest in heart. So don't just go, "Oh, you're not from around here. You must be here to help," and
that's right. I mean,
open your door.
we have to hold them to the same standards as we hold other people. So it's like, you get all the, like I say, I've heard people before, like on podcasts, where they're saying, and I'm not cussing anyone's experiences, okay? Like I say, I understand everyone's had different experiences, right? And I can't put myself in other people's shoes. I know that. But what I will say is that I've seen people that are telling one story about how they've been involved with spiritually enlightened beings and stuff, or the Galactic Federation of Love or whatever. And when you look at their faces, they're telling a very different story. They look like people that have been through trauma and are suffering from Stockholm syndrome, or they've been fed a load of like bull and they've bought it, and it helps them sleep at night to believe that it's true. And I'm really like, trust me, I have so much sympathy for people that are going through that, because I've been through it. I'm not stood here on a pedestal saying how I would never be fooled like these people. I'm saying I was absolutely fooled by these people. And I only got out of it through like some humility, to realize that I was wrong. I was wrong. I was the idiot in the situation. I was wrong. And I had to go back to square one, to find out who I actually was. But I always say, like, like, how comes, like, you'll see these people and they'll say they're involved with this, that, the other, or whatever. And you're like, okay, well, call them down to look after your cat while you go away then. And they'd be like, what do you mean? I'd be like, well, surely they would do that for you. I said, even your neighbor would do that for you. And she's not a spiritually evolved higher being, but she'd help you out. She doesn't even like your cat, but she'll look after it for you because she's your neighbor, right?
Right.
It's like, why wouldn't these guys do that then? Why won't they help? Why are you saying that they're watching what's going on in the world, but they don't want to help? They just want to come to you in the middle of the night and tell you stories. That's not helping the world, right? Why, like, where's the genuine, like, why not bypass? Why is it that we're not seeing like open contact, right? Like, why are we leaving it into the hands of like our governments and stuff? Like saying, well, that's how we're going to get disclosure. So who are these beings? Who are these beings that are going to let our governments control the narrative about what's going on with non-human intelligence? If I was them and I could scan the world, right, and I've got computers that are light years beyond any AI, whatever we've got now, I could know all the information in the world. I could know everything that's going on in the world, right, in an instant. Yeah. Why would I choose, out of all of the people in the world, to work with basically sex offenders in suits? You know what I mean? Why would I choose to work with them, right? Only if I was of the same ilk, only if I was nefarious as well, But like, if I was genuinely wanting to help humanity out and get it to move forward, I would bypass them. That is exactly what, I would bypass them and I would come straight to the people en masse, put a UFO over every town, broadcast out into everyone's minds, and explain to them the situation that we're in and how to get out of it. That would change the world, right? I'm sure maybe there's a nuance, there's a better way of doing it than what I'm suggesting, but they would know what the better way to do it was. What they wouldn't do is just do a load of clandestine stuff, keep disappearing and appearing, abducting people. It's just not nice behavior. If I took someone out for a drink and then the next day they woke up and couldn't remember anything that had happened the night before, do you think and I turned around to them and said, well, that's because that's for your spiritual advancement, mate. I don't think it would stand up in court, do you? Right? Right. So these guys suggesting that they're just doing it to try and protect us, like taking our memories away of what happens when you're being abducted and all this kind of stuff. And the whole idea of like it being about genetic experimentation, well, that's got to be baloney as well, because either that or they're not as good at gene splicing as we are. I mean, we can get stuff done. We've cloned animals and stuff, all the rest of it, but they've been doing this for at least what we know of decades, all right? And we're not getting anywhere. They're not getting anywhere with what they want to do, or they're nearly got a hybrid species. I'm not saying those things aren't happening, but I'm just saying that some of it doesn't add up, Yeah, they're either advanced or they're not, right?
Right,
So,
I agree. And Dan has an interesting question for you. He's asking, Dave, have you heard of the Penny Rich UFO incident of 2016? I'm thinking that's pronounced Penny Rich. It's Pentrch. A lady called Kaz Clark had an incredible encounter with a pyramid craft.
Right. So, yes, I do. Right. I live 10 minutes away from Penturk. That's how it's pronounced, mate. Penturk.
Okay.
Right. And it's known as the Penturk incident. All right. And so a craft appeared in 2016, in March 2016. And it was a big, as far as I'm aware, it was a big triangular craft that had like lightning coming out of it, kind of stuff. And the military turned up and it released a couple of small white orbs that flew over to a place called Smilog Woods, which I go to about once a fortnight for a walk round. It's such a beautiful place. And where the UFOs were shot down over Smilog, the government came in and chopped down all the trees on the bit where it fell down. Now, I know people that know Kaz Clark, and they say she's absolute stand-up, 100%. She's genuine, right? Only last week, I work in a garage as a mechanic, and I was taking a lady home who was leaving her car at the garage, and I said, "Oh, wait, where do you live?" And she said, "Oh, I live in Penturk." So I was like, "Okay, cool." So I started driving her back to Penturk, and I always say, if someone brings it up, I'd always say, "Oh, have you heard of the Penturk incident?"
Right.
And she said, "Oh," now she was quite a well-to-do woman, like quite. She was probably 65 and like well off, And she said, "Oh yeah." She said, "Yeah, it happened behind my house." She said, "I live right on the edge of Penturk." She said, "And there's just fields like from behind my house." She said, "It happened in the fields behind my house." So, and I've heard a couple of first-hand testimonies. So it absolutely did happen. If you don't mean to plug, but if you go on my YouTube channel, which is called David Hunt Talks, I've made a couple of videos from Smilog Woods, which is where I've done a video of the actual crash site. I've stood at the crash site and given us like a little 10-minute talk sort of thing. So if you're interested, sorry, what was the guy's name that's asking the question?
Dan Guest.
Dan, sorry. So yeah, Dan, if you want to see it like firsthand, like on a video sort of thing, go on my channel, mate, and yeah, it's in there. I can't remember I wish I could remember the title of the video, but you'll kind of see it's a daytime video where I'm outside walking, and yeah, I go there all the time. Go there all the time. It's a really lovely place. Very sort of has a sort of eerie feeling about it, you know. But yeah, that definitely did happen. Yeah, definitely happened. So yeah.
He said he's going to subscribe after this episode.
Okay, awesome, mate. Yeah, nice. I think there's about 60 or 70 videos on there, where, like I say, I talk about my experiences in more detail, and but I also help a lot of people with coming to terms with awakening, because it's not what people think it is. You know, like enlightenment is not all roses and sunsets. You know, it's quite a raw process of coming face to face with what you really are, and the truth. You know,
Yeah.
so
Personally, I wish it was the rosy field,
yeah.
but
Now that's
yeah, it's not.
Well, it is true that the truth will set you free, you know, but
That's
first it will
true.
piss you off.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is true. But like,
So yeah,
yeah,
and one question you mentioned, you knew you were on the ship,
mm.
and so I'm wondering how much recall do you have of what it was like on the ship? Like, what do you remember seeing beyond? Is it just everybody on the table, so to speak,
No,
or
so yeah, so it was like I said to you, as a child, I don't remember going on board the crafts. You know, I remember being taken, but that was it. But as far as the initial trigger experience as an adult, it wasn't what people generally think that it would be like. So it was daytime. This was about 1:30 in the day, you know, and it was a sunny day. Okay. When I was on board the craft, it was only a small craft. It was like like a small flying saucer type thing, and it had windows. Uh, Now, when I was in there, like I would say, it was only about like probably the whole craft was probably only about 30 foot, you know, like in diameter. The inside of it was kind of dark. It wasn't that there was lighting. It was like very similar to like if you were stood in someone's attic of their house, you know, but they've got ceiling windows. You know, it was just kind of like that. And they had like panels and stuff, you know, but it it all looked a little bit sci-fi, to be honest with you. Like, and I again, I wonder about the deceptive nature of what it was all about. I can't really trust any of it, but like it was almost exactly how you'd imagine like a 1970s, you know, someone was like saying, "Oh, build me a stage set for an inside of a UFO." You know, it was very similar to that. It had like knobs and levers and round buttons. Do you know what I mean? Yeah.
yes,
Um, but I was when I was there, and again, it just had like a flat floor, but it was not lit. It was there was no specific lighting, and there wasn't this you know, when people describe during abductions that there's a kind of like a diffused lighting. You know, they don't know where the light's coming from. That wasn't the case. The only light that I could see was coming through the windows. So it was, like I say, it was a sunny day. I'm sure they, whatever. I don't know the nature of what they were doing when I'm not around, but in this daylight situation, it was just the light that was coming through the windows. That there was like they were stood in front of a balcony window, you know, and you could see behind them, you know, that he was looking out into the daylight. Wasn't up in space or anything. I'm pretty sure it took place exactly where we were, above some fields, you know, in Oxford. Um, so, but yeah, there wasn't. I don't remember a smell. And the other thing I would say as well, as far as not having too much detail about what the inside of the craft looked like, was that the whole time that I was there, I think I was under some sort of control. You know, I was under some sort of perceptual control. Because the guy that was talking to me, that was stood in the middle, he had like almost like a hypnotic kind of stare, you know, and I found it very hard to look away from him. He was looking into my eyes, and there was a very powerful, energetic connection between me and him. and it made it quite difficult to, like, to look away or to focus too much on anything else that was going on. He had a woman to one side of him and a bloke to another side of him. All I knew about them really was that I could tell that they were really good looking, like ridiculous. When people make you feel ugly in their presence, it was like that.
Yeah.
I felt like an ugly little runt because they were so beautiful. But yeah, but it doesn't matter, does it? Because there's shapeshifters; they can look however they want. So it doesn't mean they are beautiful, does it? But there you go.
Yeah. It kind of reminds me in a way a little bit, how we're talking about this in the movie Star Trek 6, The
Mm.
Undiscovered Country, where she's the shapeshifter and she starts taking the form of the captain and somebody else. And he's like, I can't believe I kissed you. And it's like, yeah, you do have to wonder,
Yeah.
did you kiss her or did you kiss him? Or, what, who was that even lips? And, it's like, oh, yeah, the mind just starts to go, uh oh,
Well,
what did we just
I'm quite
do?
glad that I didn't kiss any of them, mate. To be honest with
Yeah.
you. But yeah, you're right. I mean, I don't know much about Star Trek, to be honest with you. But yeah, I assume that I've heard stuff about Gene Roddenberry and stuff. Is that his name, Roddenberry?
Yes,
Um,
Roddenberry.
so I assume that they're not just putting it out of thin air. Some of the concepts that they come up with for the show. He's definitely someone who will have had some sort of first-hand knowledge on the subject, I'm sure. So yeah.
Yeah. So since, we've talked about the impacts of, your experiences and everything in those moments,
Mm.
I'm kind of curious to take a different turn to it and go, because of these experiences, what is your hope for the future?
Okay. How much time have we got left, Michael? What's the time? Is it
Well,
10 past?
we have
Yeah.
12 minutes left.
Right. Okay. So if you like, mate, I'll have to finish on this. Okay. And
Okay.
it's a good point for us to come around. Obviously, we could talk for hours, I'm sure, but as far as like this show, I'll finish on this. Okay. And so I don't have any hope for the future, but I'll explain myself. Okay. I'm not being bleak. All right. But I want to come back to what happened to me when I was a teenager. Okay, I have made a video on my channel where I go into it in absolute depth, but I will just outline it for you here. Okay, and then what I've come as I've matured spiritually myself, like what I've come to realize was the truth of that experience and what it was trying to tell me. Um, so while I was awake, I was taken out of my body and I was accelerated. I assume like on an astral level at first, but like accelerated out of this reality entirely. I kept accelerating until I was going at something like the speed of light, and then all of a sudden everything changed, and I wasn't moving at all. And I found myself in I want to say place, but it doesn't really justify it. But I was beyond space and time. And in this place, I didn't have a body, but I was pure awareness. I was still aware of I had a point of observation, but I didn't have the same level of identification with the persona and the stuff that I'd had as like you normally have when you're filtering reality through the body. There was a narrator that came to me that was all kind of around me, if you like. It's like I say, words don't really do it justice. I just hope that people get the gist of what I'm trying to say. And it said to me, I want to show you reality for what it is from this perspective. Like, yeah, of course, I was, I was along for the ride. Obviously, I didn't really feel like I had much choice, but it said that I was worried about, like, and it was right at the time. I was a very angsty teenager. I had all the normal hang-ups that teenagers have, and I was depressed and worried about which girls liked me or whatever, wanting to fight everyone, all that kind of stuff. And it said, I want to show you reality for what it is, from this perspective. Now, in front of me, what happened was it felt like energy started vortexing, and I couldn't tell because I didn't have any. There's no perspective in ultimate reality. I couldn't tell whether it was right happening in front of me, like 2 centimeters in front of me, or whether it was happening 10 million miles away. There was you couldn't tell. Okay. And but there was like a kind of disturbance in the force, that you couldn't see, but it was like a vortex going up and a vortex going down, and they were spinning different ways. And all of a sudden, like a white light, like looked like a perfect star, just appeared in between them. And it said, that is reality. He said, that is everything that ever has, is, and will happen in your world. And I was like, what? And I closed in on it. And when I closed in on it, it was like a electromagnetic, like, information fields were going backwards and forwards within this white light. And it said to me that it was unlimited creative potential. The truth, he said, that's what the truth is unlimited creative potential. And it said it's the dreamer. He said that it could create realities through pure will, and that it doesn't have to create buildings and streets and cars and stuff. It doesn't do that. It's not the way. I mean, and science is definitely like on board with this now, isn't it? About the way that reality is much more like a simulation than it is an authentic 3D material, experience. And it was basically saying lines along the same lines. But bear in mind, this was 40 years ago. And it was saying that basically consciousness decodes the information fields and turns it into a like holographic kind of 3D reality. And I was like, okay, there was nothing else to really say. I didn't know, I couldn't argue with it. And everything, it was like hyper real as well. It was like, so when I came back from it, I realized just how dreamlike this reality actually is. And it was a little bit like having your head pulled above water for the first time. It was like I've been living my whole life underwater, and this was showing me a hyper reality. More recently, over the last couple of years, people have been talking a lot about having DMT experiences and talking about hyper reality, about how when they have these experiences, they're experiencing something that's realer than real. And it was very similar to the way I've heard DMT experiences described. But I can just tell you now, I wasn't on DMT. In fact, I don't think anyone was doing it, 40 years ago or whatever. I'd never heard of it. But then it sort of went on and told me that there was a particular part of the story that I was experiencing, and it just wanted to show me that. And it showed me that where me and you, Michael, are, and everyone watching, it said that we'd gone one step further, and that we were living in it didn't call it a simulation. It kept referring to it as a dream, like a piece of artwork, And it said, but you're living in a dream within a dream. It said there's a proportion of the dream that's cut itself off from the prime dream. And it said it was done with a kind of super ego. And it said that it based itself on separation. And what it had done is it cut itself off from the source of energy by spinning off from the prime dream. And it said because of the nature of it doing that, it had to parasite energy from consciousness that was trapped within its system. Whereas in the prime reality, consciousness draws its energy from the infinite source of energy. Do you know what I mean? And it's also the people that live there. Like what I'm suspecting the three guys that came into my front room, that they come from a prime reality. And they are consciously aware of the truth, if you like. And it said that basically that's where we were. We were kind of, it wasn't judging it, but it was like saying that we'd become trapped, in a consciousness that was based on separation, which had led to fear and it had led to imbalance. Right. I'm trying to get this all out fairly quickly. Sorry, mate. But it said that basically it was over. It said, I want to show you. He said, obviously, it's not a fight. It's not like it has to worry about, what's going to happen. If infinite love decides that something's over, it's over. It's as simple as that. There isn't any authority higher than the source. Do you know what I mean? And
I agree.
so it just said, he said, like, basically, he said that this dream within a dream was ended. And it said what it was doing was influxing the way it's done. It said it's a done deal. It said there's nothing the control system can do about it. He said that when you're looking at the control system and thinking that they're all powerful because they're now rolling out technology and AI and surveillance and putting chemicals in the food and doing all the rituals or whatever, all the stuff. He said, what you're actually watching is these guys in their death throes. He said they've been controlling this reality for eons and they haven't had to do any of this stuff. They just had to control our belief systems and that kind of stuff. Do you know what I mean? It was fairly easy to do.
Right.
But it said since it had started influxing all this awareness, we said because of course the way that this separated dream could work had to work on us being asleep, spiritually speaking. So what it had done is it kept influxing loads of consciousness from the prime dream coming into this world. Now, of course, everyone forgets who they are when they come into this world. Okay, that's just the way it is. There's like almost like a magnetic layer around this matrix that wipes your mind. But it said that consciousness that was new, that was coming in kind of fresh, or had only been here a couple of times, had a much greater chance of waking up to its true state of being. And that is exactly what was happening. It said that like loads of people were coming into the world, if you like, at this level. And of course, they're into truth seeking and seeing the conspiracies and going on spiritual journeys and stuff. And that was happening all over this realm. And basically there was nothing they could do about it. They're doing everything they can. They've upped the satanic rituals. They've upped everything they're doing. They're upping. They're trying to up the fear. They're trying to up the wars. They're trying to put more chemicals in the sky. Whatever. They're doing everything they can, but it's not working, and it's not going to work either because ultimately this consciousness that created this system is going to be healed as well. This is not a us versus them situation. It's not and then we're going to get him, the guy that runs this place. That's not how it's going to work. It's a reunification of consciousness. So the separated ego that created the dream within a dream was going to forgive itself basically and become unified again. And then as a complete unified consciousness, we go back into the prime dream and the world changes. Like it said that like the prime dream was very similar to this as far as the way it looked. It has sunsets and mountains and you know what I mean? Like it's
Yes.
this is a shadow of that world. So it's like a bad reflection of that world. So it looks very similar. But it's just that this world has been covered with a layer of lies and separation, which is not true, as in it's not real. It was kind of corny, but it was kind of suggesting that obviously infinite love was the only truth. You know what I mean? That fear and death and all that kind of stuff were an illusion. And
Right.
and so I like after the experience of that, like I say, if you want the full details and stuff, please do go to the channel and listen to a video that's called The Event, where I talk about it in detail.
And I put the link to your YouTube in the show.
All right, cool. Thank you, mate.
And
but years later, I got to grips with what really that all meant, So one of the people that really helped me was a guy called David Icke. I don't know if you know who David Icke is.
Yes, I do actually.
So yeah, so I've met him now, and we've talked, for a while about all this stuff, and he really helped me. really helped me conceptualize what happened to me. You know, there was a book he wrote called "Infinite Love is the Only Truth. Everything else is an illusion," and that really helped me. It really helped me understand, and I think it was a divine way that I was brought into contact with that book. You know, in order to help me conceptualize what happened to me. And
Right.
so yeah,
Um,
so to just cap off, all I'd say is, mate, is I don't have hope, and I don't have belief, because the actual truth doesn't require belief, and the truth is available to everybody. Don't listen to me. You know, you don't have to believe what I'm saying, because it turns out that you're the truth. Okay, you're the only thing that's real. You're the only truth. You know, not your persona and everything, but who you really are is true. And so
right.
everyone can know truth. Okay, you can know truth. You don't have to believe in it. You don't have to convince yourself. You don't have to do any rituals. It is true. You know, so yeah. So, but maybe Michael, maybe another time you'll have to have me back on, mate, and I'll carry on. We'll get into the depths of this, you know. But yeah,
I'd love
that's
to
what I
have
was
you
thinking.
back on, and I know you're on time, and so I just want to say before we end this episode, from my heart and the heart of my shows to you, thank you for what you're doing for humanity. It's seen, felt, and heard, so thank you.
Well, thank you, Michael. Do you know what I mean? Like, and I can tell you, you know, it is coming from love. Now, where I am, I know the difference. Okay, and like I say, I know I'm not all you know, sitting cross-legged under a tree and stuff, you know, but I do love you all, and I'm going to continue to do what I'm doing. I know there's things that I'm doing, and it will not stop, because we are all one. And what I do for me and what I do for you is there's no differentiation. So yeah, we just carry on. And thank you for what you're doing, Michael, because you're creating platforms and you're helping this message get out there. So you know, effectively, we are all one thing, mate, helping itself out.
I agree, so thank you for that, and we will definitely have you back on, and I'm going to call it an afternoon because you are in the UK, so it is your evening, and so I know you have commitments. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story with us. And everyone, make sure you follow his channel for his videos. Follow my channel, as you never know when he'll be popping up again on a future episode. And so, with that, I'm going to say, have a wonderful afternoon, everyone. And thank you again to you, Dave. Have a wonderful week, Dave, and blessings to you. And with that, I'm going to say goodbye, everyone.
Thanks, Michael. Bye, everyone. Take care.